Hi, friends. I'm Olivia. This is AV Club, where I talk about horror, literary fiction, weird books, whatever I want to talk about. And this is the midyear reading tag. This was previously known as the midyear freakout tag. However, I am using the questions that I used last year, which were the ones that Books and Lala adapted. I don't remember what all the changes were, but we're just rocking with that again. I just pulled my questions that I used for the last year's video. And the first one is, how is your reading going this year? And honestly, thank you. My reading is going great. I've read a lot of really good books this year. I'm on track. I'm like exactly on track for my reading goal for the year. And those included like some pretty big books. And honestly, I'm just like pleased with the variety of what I've read and really looking forward to books in the second half of the year. So, yeah, everything's going well. I've also been the most consistent that I've ever been on booktube before, and I'm really happy with it. And yeah, I think it's going to keep going well. The next question is, what is the best book that you've read this year? And if you've been following along with my channel at all, you'll probably know that it is Fingersmith by Sarah Waters. I was obsessed with this book whenever I read it, and I'm still thinking about it all the time. This is kind of a Victorian literary thriller. Like, it's not really a thriller, but there's so many twists and turns that it is thrilling throughout. But the relationship between the two main characters, Susan and Maud, did everything for me. Like, I have never been so obsessed with characters in my life. But this was just my favorite book for so many reasons. I loved the pace of it. I loved the atmosphere of it. It is so well written. I have never been so gooped and gagged by a book before, just like honestly shocked at what was happening. And it's even more incredible that I was shocked by what was happening because I actually saw a film adaptation of this, the Handmaiden, the Korean version. And even having seen a film adaptation, I was still like shocked. Like, what? It takes several of the same big plot beats, but there was still more to uncover in this book. And so, if you have seen The Handmaiden but haven't read this book yet, I highly recommend it. If you love women, you got to read this book. I mean, it's a woman loving book for sure. And it makes me keenly aware that I need to read a lot more Sarah Waters. The next question is about the best sequel that you've read. And I haven't technically read a sequel this year. However, I think you could kind of consider James by Percival Everett as a spiritual sequel. Sequel coincider, alternate perspective. That's what we're going with because I just want a reason to talk about James. And this was a book that we read for a GG No Reread on my podcast in conjunction with Halo 2. And if you're wondering how those go together, it's because they're both taken from an unexpected POV. That James is a retelling of Huckleberry Finn, but from the slave Jim's perspective, and it is so good. It is so funny. I think most people expect it to be kind of a slam on Mark Twain. However, I think it is more a slam on the types of things that we censor, and that maybe the material conditions of people is kind of the most pressing concern, more so than hemming and hawing about the kind of language that children are able to read in school. But it is just such a well plotted novel, on top of having all of this commentary about language and about the American Black experience, both during that time and modernly, in the types of people that we give respect to, the type of language that we give respect to. Just an excellent novel, and I mean, this is so widely loved. I'm not speaking anything new into the world, but yeah, a spiritual sequel. It's how we're going to take this question. And we're going to go a little rogue on this next one too, because the next one is your favorite reread. And I have not technically reread a book, except for that I've read Gatsby by Jane Crowther, which is a retelling of The Great Gatsby, but gender swapped in a current day retelling. And so Jay Gatsby is now an influencer whose husband has been canceled online. And the reason that I'm going to count this as a reread is because it's not even a spiritual retelling. It's like basically a page for page retelling of the book, where you're seeing every scene happen, but from this new perspective. I really enjoyed reading this, but I don't know who I would consider recommending this to, except for someone who did want to reread The Great Gatsby. That if you're reading it for the first time, yeah, you don't have to read The Great Gatsby to read this. But if you don't like The Great Gatsby, then I find it unlikely that you would like this because it is such a page for page retelling. But I'm curious to know what you think about such a strict retelling, such a faithful retelling. I think that it's kind of interesting considering that that's kind of like the history of storytelling, is being able to tell variations on something, thinking about oral tradition, something like the Odyssey being told over and over again until it was able to be put down in written language. And so thinking of that, about oral traditions and storytelling in that way, that if a story is still resonating, why not do this? I think it was interesting as a practice. It did feel like a reread to me. So although I'm not a typical rereader, although I always say things like maybe I'll reread this someday, I likely won't. This one counts, and I really enjoyed my time reading it. The next question is about favorite genre, and it's really hard to say if I've read more horror or literary fiction this year without just going to the stats and looking it up. But the very specific subgenre that has been my favorite this year has been weird historical, mostly Victorian writing that I've loved. Fingersmith. I've loved Victorian Psycho. Right now I'm reading Hungerstone. I also really loved Perfume earlier this year by Patrick Susskind, which is about a very good smeller and murderer in historic France. And I really need more recommendations in this vein. I just love the atmosphere of it, and I just want weird, bad, spooky things to happen during this time period. I think that there's a lot to explore in terms of class disparity and illness and social roles, women's roles during this time. I think it makes it a really compelling time to set a horror in. And yeah, I'm not tired of this yet. I will read all the recommendations if you have any. A new release that I want to read, well, I outlined this a couple days ago before I started reading it, but now reading Hungerstone by Kat Dunn, which is a Carmilla retelling. And it seems to be a pretty consistent Carmilla retelling. Like, I thought it was just kind of like vaguely inspired by it, but it seems like a lot of the plot points are the same, and I'm really enjoying it so far because I liked Carmilla, and having it more fleshed out and written by a woman and so much more women loving behavior. Yeah, this is a a delicious book for me. The next question is about your most anticipated book of the year. And I don't really keep up with everything that's going to come out in the year. So, most anticipated, maybe, but You Weren't Meant to Be Human by Andrew Joseph White is a book that looks really interesting to me, which is described as Alien meets Midsummer, which I think is a delicious combination. But it appears to be about a trans man who becomes pregnant and is in this weird Appalachian community, and there's forced birth cult kind of behavior involved. I don't know. It sounds weird, but it's getting really great early reviews. It just sounds really interesting to me, and I haven't read anything by Andrew Joseph White yet, and keen to get to one. Our next question is about the biggest disappointment, and unfortunately, I've talked about it recently. Polybius. This was a stinker for me. It's supposedly going to be about this spooky killer arcade game. However, I felt like it didn't really have much on the vibes department. I didn't really feel like it had much on the video game department. Nothing really from the creepy pasta department. Really just about kind of a rage virus, and it was more action based, which I think does appeal to some people, but it was just a lot of traveling around to locations, hearing that someone was infected, was acting weird, checking it out. Yes, some violence happens, and it just was very repetitive for me. And mostly just a big disappointment because I was really looking forward to it after reading a book about Polybius last year and also disliking it. So, really unfortunate, and hoping that the video game horror front turns around soon, because really I've just been disappointed lately. No shade to the author though. He seems great. This just disappointing, sorry. The next question is about your biggest surprise, and mine has to be Deep Cuts by Holly Brickley. This was a book that I found as an ARC in an op shop, so it technically shouldn't have been there. However, I'm so glad it was because I read this before it actually came out, and then turns out it ended up being like a book of the month pick and became a very popular book. I think people were reading it more as like a romance, but I think this is more literary fiction with a romantic relationship happening than a romance. Um, I loved this book, but because it ended up being popular, my review ended up becoming popular, which is so exciting. I love when something like that happens. Always love some, engagement. But it was also a big surprise in how much I loved this because it was marketed as kind of an indie sleaze Daisy Jones and the Six. Big fan of this era of music. The Yeah Yeah Yeahs, Modest Mouse, The Shins, everything that was going around on the music blogs at the time. So it was very appealing to me from that perspective, but also I just loved the characters. They were very different from characters that I've read before. I found them very considerate in how they were treated, that they were compelling in their ways, although, not perfect, that they had their allure and also their issues, and it was all very compelling to me. So yeah, a big surprise both in how I found it and how popular it ended up being after I happened upon it, and also just how much I liked it. The next question is about your favorite new author, and the author that I've read two winners from this year is Nat Cassidy. I loved Rest Stop, gave it 5 stars at the very beginning of this year, and then recently read When the Wolf Comes Home, gave that 4 stars. So two winners, a new fave horror author for me for sure. Looking to get to the rest of his backlist, looking to see what he comes out with next. But these are just books that have great character development in my perspective, as well as like really unique and ambitious takes on things that we've seen before, that we've seen survival horror before, but Rest Stop takes it to a weirder and more brutal new place, that we've seen werewolf and shapeshifter stories before, but When the Wolf Comes Home is not that. It is something completely different and has a lot to say. I love the staples of the genre, and it seems like Nat Cassidy loves the staples of the genre but can take it to a brand new place. And so yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to reading the rest of his work soon. Favorite new character? We're going back to Susan and Maud from Fingersmith. Susan, who is our thief con artist character, who is going to scam Maud Lily out of her fortune by becoming a maid in her home and helping, a friend from the thief circle in London at the time, part of a con scheme to marry her off, commit her to an asylum, etc., etc. And what do you know? But the bond between these two characters is a little magnetic. And so, how does that complicate the idea of conning her out of her fortune? And then there's twists and turns that have to be read to be believed from there. But my God, I have not read fan fiction since I was in middle school, and so it's not been really a part of my life. But whenever I finished this, I was like, oh my gosh, I need to make a TikTok and make fan cams of these characters. To me, their song is How Bad Do You Want Me by Lady Gaga. I just see it in my head. I listened to the song over and over again, like, oh my gosh, I'm so down bad for these characters. And yeah, everything about this is just like so weirdly swoony to me, that yeah, it's not a romance book, but there's something special going on here. And for that reason, we have to consider that Fingersmith is also the book that made me cry this year. I don't really cry reading books, but the last pages of this, yes, I teared up because they are just special characters and I knew I was leaving their world. And yeah, I just have I told you that I like this book? It's so good. I beam inside thinking about that. This is just my new all-time favorite book. Like, this Rebecca, Picnic at Hanging Rock. There's something about weird women relationships that does something for me. The next question is about a book that made you happy. And I think that this could be any of them because I really try to read books that make me happy, but something specific was The Third Gilmore Girl. And this just had a lot going for it for me. I love a memoir. I love a memoir set in New York. I love a memoir told by a woman who has had decades of life experience, especially in the entertainment industry. And I don't really have shows that I rewatch either, except for Gilmore Girls is like one of my only comfort pieces of media ever. Like there's a few movies that I'll rewatch still. I was a huge movie rewatcher whenever I was like in middle school and high school, but now there's so many things that I want to watch. I never make time to rewatch things really, except for some of my, favorite Halloween movies, etc., Christmas movies, things that are seasonal. But Gilmore Girls I can watch anytime. And I don't watch it so much now that I've been living here, but whenever I was getting home from my healthcare job in the States, it was very stressful. And sometimes like that was just where I was able to actually turn my brain off and relax. And so that was a very special show for me. And hearing her perspective and how positive of an experience that show was working there, the relationships between the characters and the showrunners. Like, there's so many shows where you love the show, but what was actually happening for the actors was really toxic and upsetting. Um, and so to hear the opposite, that it was just such a positive time, that it was so special to both so many people watching it as well as the people making it, is just something that does make me happy because everyone deserves to have a happy work environment and to feel fulfilled by what they're doing. I also just like, I really appreciated that she was so openly political, especially about women's rights. And so it was just a really positive time reading the memoir. And yeah, it was definitely a good one. The next question is about the most beautiful book you've bought this year, but I have to give a special shout out to But Not Too Bold and Bat Eater, which are just honorable mentions because I read them on ebook and I don't have them physically, but I love these covers. I think they're gorgeous. But the one that I actually own is Death of the Author by Nnedi Okorafor. And I just love the UK cover of this. I love the swirls of Ankara clothing inspired patterns, but you can see that there's computer chips in them, which is very on brand for the story, for the blend of Nigerian culture with science fiction. But I would describe this book more as literary fiction with heavy science fiction elements rather than vice versa, that a lot of this book is literary fiction. It is about following this author as she's written this book that's become a bestseller while also dealing with societal, family, structural issues related to being a disabled Black woman in the United States, having tenuous work situations, having difficult relationships with her family and with society, with how her work is being treated, how she's being treated by the industry, by fans, and her self-actualization along the way. This was such an interesting book. We just recorded an episode on this today for No Cartridge. It was our Gigi No Reread pick for this quarter, for quarter two, talking about it with Split Fiction. And we'll have a live show on it next week, actually. So yeah, join us for that discussion. If you've read this book, if you haven't read this book, whatever, we'd love to have you. But I think this is just such a gorgeous cover, and it fits the tone of the book really well. I like the type. It's just nice. And it's like it's such a hefty book, and I don't read too many. I feel like more of the longer books I read on audiobook, so it's nice to have such a tome on the shelf. The next question is about what books to read by the end of the year. And oh my gosh, there are so many. Of my 25 books to read in 2025, I've read, I think, less than 5 of them. I'd still really like to get to the Lord of the Rings trilogy. All of the books that I mentioned, I really need to get to all of them. There's so many new books that I want to read. So yeah, there's a lot. I think I'm going to have to prioritize reading those books that I had in a list at some point, maybe November, maybe a no regrets November, to try to get to all of your books that you plan to read before the end of the year. Cause I'm thinking ahead, like, okay, July is Jolly July, and then there's maybe August, but that's kind of whenever I was thinking of reading Lord of the Rings. Then there's Shorty September. October, I'm definitely mood reading Halloween books, and so maybe November. Maybe November is when it happens. December, nothing really gets done in December. So yeah, there's so many books I have to read. I need to actually write down all of the books that I said in my 25 and 25 video, because I haven't revisited that video. I kind of just have a loose idea of what I might have said. Next up is, what is your fave video or post you've done this year? Over on Instagram, I did a Songs That Feel Like Party for You by Charlie XCX. I really like that one. I thought about doing it as a video on YouTube as well, but I'd already done a Charlie XCX video, so I thought, let's try something new on Instagram. I would like to do more on Instagram book-wise, but I find I feel like Instagram is totally cooked now. Like, no one can find your content anyway unless you're doing like reels, and that's not really something that appeals to me, is doing reels to music. I don't know. That's just like, I would like to do infographic kind of content, but it just seems like not a popular thing to do. I also don't want to stop posting about birds on my Instagram, so that's the other thing. It's all books and birds. But over here, I liked my video on Severance related book recommendations. Really, my favorite thing has been my consistency lately, that I've been uploading consistently every week, trying to increase it to 2 times a week, which is new for me, and also just like trying to include new editing techniques, etc. Just trying to get better at it. Be consistent, be better, and that's my favorite thing. And yeah, anything that people engage with makes me happy, because I just like talking with people about books. So, and then the last question is about your favorite book community members. What a nice note to end on, because yeah, that's what makes this really worth it, and it makes me want to just like keep at it. Someone I'm really inspired by is Lauren of Happy Haunts Library. She is just like such a nice human being. All of her videos are so deeply heartwarming to me, that she just has such charisma, and the way that she talks about things, it just makes me happy that she talks about cozy things and hobbies in a way that is not surface level, that it's just like really full of joy. Such joyful videos, and I really appreciate that. She has really cool video editing. I love her editing style. I really want to start doing vlogs, and so I'm really inspired by how she films things, trying to like keep track of like, oh wow, like what is she doing that's making this like so entertaining to watch. Also love Alex from the Bookubus. She's also such a nice human being. She was like the first person who's ever asked me to collaborate on anything, whenever she asked me to do a video for Jollo July film recommendations last year, which I was so honored to be a part of. She's doing Jolly July again this year, along with Kelsey from Simon Slashers, who is another person who is just like so full of like energy for the community, such a nice person. I also really appreciate Crystal of Fiber Artsy. She has like recently gone through this thing where she hasn't been able to edit her book videos. And so there's just been videos where she is able to just like talk without any kind of editing about all of the books that she read in the past month, and talk about them so fluently, which is something that I admire and I'm not able to do yet, but maybe someday. And also, it's just like such another nice person. Like, I just feel blessed to know these people, and to be able to watch their videos, to get inspiration from them, both in what I want to read, but also just what they bring to the community and how they're able to build community. So, very inspiring people. But yeah, down in the comments, please talk to me about some of the stuff that you've read this year. I'd love for you to subscribe and hang out with me again sometime. But I've just been finding so much joy in making videos recently, and really enjoying editing. So hopefully that comes through. I've been doing this kind of on and off for the past few years, and this has been my best year on booktube so far in terms of like how much I've uploaded, and I really have loved how much it's been able to help me remember stuff that I've read about books. It's just been such a nice time. I feel like I've made new friends, I've learned new things, I'm having so much fun. I'm hoping the second half of the year is even better. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time, and that you spent some time with me. So I will talk to y'all again soon. Bye.